Hi everybody, it's Laura from Green Tree. Today we are talking about sugar. It's something that a lot of us really like, but also that a lot of people really want to avoid or cut back on. I'm not going to get into all the different arguments and theories about what sugar does inside the body or the reasons why you should or shouldn't eat it. We're just going to talk about some of the different kinds of sugars, different kinds of replacers, and what you can do and what you should watch out for if you want to cut back on sugar in your diet. I think something we can pretty much all agree on is that sugar is a food with a lot of calories that isn't accompanied by a lot of other nutritional value. And so any other reasons aside, we'll go from there and say that people do want to cut back on sugar pretty often, especially this time of year after a lot of us overdid it a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is tell you about some of the places that sugar can hide, some of the things that you might want to watch out for if you're trying to eat less sugar. One of them is actually canned vegetables. You won't see this as often in something like plain canned beans, but any kind that's got a flavor, whether that's chili beans or baked beans or anything else like that, even other types of canned vegetables, you'll find that can be quite a bit of sugar in those. So my suggestion on that front would be to get the plain ones and season them yourself, or to stick with frozen vegetables instead of canned when you can. That's another good way to avoid some extra sugar. Here's one that makes a lot of people sad. Condiments. Condiments are a place where there is a lot of hidden sugar. So this is sriracha, and sriracha is going to have more sugar than, say, plain hot sauce. It's got a lot of great flavor, but it does have sugar in it. That's also true of things like ketchup and salad dressing, peanut butter and jelly. So those are things where you don't have to check every label every time, but maybe just the next time you're going to buy a new bottle of ketchup, take a little look at the label on the one that you already have and say, okay, can I get a brand that has a little bit less sugar than the one that I currently have? Another thing you can do, especially if we're talking about, say, peanut butter or nut butters, is you can get nut butters like this that don't have any other added ingredients. A lot of times when something has added sugar, it will also have added salt in order to kind of balance out the flavor. So if you don't add any sugar, you don't often need to add any salt, and vice versa. So this is going to be reversed, but this is just peanuts and a little bit of salt because there's no sugar. You don't need as much to balance it out. So sugar can also be hiding in things like bread. You'll find it obviously in a lot of desserts, but really most packaged food is going to have more sugar than when you make something from scratch. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of sugars that there are and the choices that you have if you do want to do your own cooking in order to add a little bit less sugar to your food. The sugar that most of us are familiar with is just plain cane sugar. It also, you can find light brown sugar, you can find powdered sugar, quite a few different options. Fun fact, light brown sugar is actually regular white sugar with molasses added back into it. It's not a less refined kind of sugar the way that, say, turbinado is, where it comes in those little chunks. They've never taken out the nutrients that make up something like molasses with that kind of dry brown sugar. But the type that we're used to, where you pack it into a cup and use it for baking, that actually is refined white sugar that has had something else added back into it. Now, when you're looking for sugar in little bags, you'll also find things like coconut palm sugar. You can find other ones like date sugar, for example, where they are derived from a particular fruit or other natural product like this, and they're going to be less refined. You can see like this sugar is much browner, but this is dry as opposed to the brown sugar that I showed you where it's kind of loose and packs tightly. So this is going to be something. The main difference, because it's still going to have the calories, it is still sugar, is that these will typically have a lower glycemic index than plain cane sugar will. So that's going to be something where it does not make your blood sugar rise as quickly and intensely as processed sugar. So that's one reason you might consider these alternatives. Although, our deli manager wanted me to tell you, don't try to substitute one-for-one date sugar in your baking for regular white sugar, because date sugar will not dissolve. It just won't dissolve because it actually still has some of that fibrous date material in it. Now that said, you can actually use dates as a sweetener. So if you haven't seen one, this is what a whole date looks like. So you can see they're fairly large in comparison to my hand. They're probably about 1.5 inches long typically, and they have a pit inside. I don't know if you can see kind of like this little brown nub on the top of the date there. It's kind of hard to show you. You basically pull it in half and you can pull the pit out of the inside, and these work great for sweetening things like smoothies. If you want to cut back on the cane sugar, say by 1/3 in a baked good, you could add some chopped dates where you're still going to get the sweetness, but you're going to get some added fiber. You wouldn't want to replace sugar 100% with dates in any kind of baked good. It's the same problem as date sugar. It's not going to melt and work the same way. But flavor-wise, you can use these. You can use them in any kind of, say, cooked dessert. Like you want to maybe sweeten some applesauce or some berries that you're going to put over the top of a dessert. Try adding some chopped dates to it. That'll add a lot of sweetness without adding sugar. Another type of sweetener, a natural sweetener, would be honey. You can see this actually still has the comb inside. This is local honey from K&C, and this is a naturally occurring sweetener. It's still going to have the calories just like a regular cane sugar would, but again, it's going to have a slightly different glycemic index. The same holds true for, I almost knocked my table over. That's why the camera's moving. We also have local maple syrup, and that's another sweetener you can use. I actually really like maple syrup. The thing about both maple syrup and honey is they will change the flavor of your finished baked good. So you have to keep in mind, when do you want something to taste like maple and when don't you? Personally, I almost always want something to taste like maple, but if that's not the case, maybe use honey, which is a little more subtle, or if you really want to cut down on the amount of sugar, you could go for something like xylitol. Xylitol, unfortunately, the window's kind of hard to see. This is actually the sugar here. It's a very pale white sugar. But xylitol is something that you can use that actually contains a lot fewer calories per teaspoon than regular sugar. It's what's called an alcohol sugar. Xylitol, erythritol, mannitol, they pretty much all end with OL. They can be made either by a natural sort of fermentation process or industrially, but they're referred to as alcohol sugars. And they have a couple of unique properties from regular sugar. The first one being that much lower glycemic index, lower calorie. They will not caramelize when you cook with them. So you can't put something like this on top of a creme brulee and fire it up. It's not going to caramelize. And they actually don't contribute to tooth decay, which is kind of cool. And that's why you'll see like xylitol in toothpastes, because it can actually help prevent tooth decay to some degree, as opposed to regular sugar, which continues kind of fermenting and stuff on your teeth and can cause dental issues. The only thing to be aware of is for some people, when consumed in large quantities, alcohol sugars can cause digestive upset. So it might be something to experiment with, replacing your sugar just a little bit at a time in your baked goods until you figure out how it works for you. And then, of course, if you don't want to go with the alcohol sugars and you don't want to go with the regular sugar and you want to cut that out entirely, you could try something like stevia. Stevia is really interesting. This is similar to, if you've heard of miracle berries. Stevia is just a leaf that tricks your taste buds into thinking things are sweet. The way that a miracle berry, when you taste it, will make sour things you eat afterwards taste sweet. You cannot do a one-for-one replacement with sugar because it is so many times sweeter than sugar. But they usually have a handy little guide, and they have some really great information, Sweet Leaf does, as well as the other companies, on their websites that will tell you this is how much you should use instead of a cup of sugar. This is also really handy as a liquid to put into things like tea or coffee if you want those to taste sweeter. Now, this is not an artificial sweetener. The way that, say, Equal or NutraSweet or something like that is an artificial sweetener, because those are chemically produced, whereas this is just a natural plant extract. It will not have an effect on your blood sugar the same way that these other types of sugar replacers will. So there's kind of a rundown of the different types of sweeteners and sugar replacers that you can use. Oh, we've got a little comment. Stevia is awesome and very easy to grow. Yeah, that's true. You can actually grow stevia just in a little pot on your windowsill, on your kitchen counter, in your garden. It grows pretty much as easily as, say, sage or basil. So the nice thing about that is you can experiment with really growing your own right there and using that as a sweetener. You could throw a couple of leaves into a smoothie or something like that, and really know exactly where it came from and how it was processed. So that's something stevia has over most of the other types of sugars, which are hard to grow in Michigan, except for obviously maple syrup and honey. So yeah, you can totally grow stevia yourself. So that's the rundown on the different types of alternative sweeteners and some of the things that you might find sugar in. I've also found that most of the time when baking, you can cut out a quarter to a third of the granulated sugar without having too much of an effect on your finished baked good. Sometimes you'll see a slight difference in texture or rise, but it's usually pretty negligible at that amount. If you want to cut your sugar by half or more, you might want to look into different substitutions and things that you can add into the recipe to replace that volume, because sugar often acts as a liquid in baked goods. So if any of you have tips or tricks that you like to do for cutting down on sugar or replacing sugar, feel free to share those in the comments. If you have any questions about baking with alternative sweeteners, throw those out there too. If I don't know the answer, I'll pass it on to the deli manager. I wish you guys good luck with fighting down that sweet tooth post-holidays, and I hope you're having a beautiful Friday. Bye.